So part of the motivation for this was some very promising news we had last week from Jana Schroeder, who is a candidate for the Holman Prize. I think there's 3 or 4 of them awarded every year, and it's $25,000 to a blind person to do a project that they're motivated to do that will help themselves and other blind people. And she wants to do something on making coding, the coding experience, and I think particularly the learning coding experience, better for blind people. And I think there's a very strong connection between accessible code and accessible math, because in both cases you've got a tree structure to understand, and you have the problems of visual display, of structured information, and mathematics and programming have always been close partners. And my view is that once people have got to a point where they understand what computers are, accessible programming is actually easier than accessible mathematics, and we can go into the reasons for that later. But I think the technical problems and to some extent the social problems and so forth are easier to deal with. So I rather feel that a focus on accessible code will actually accessible math along the way. It's a warm-up exercise or a dress rehearsal, if you like. So this session today is, in a certain sense, focused on, well, if Jana gets the Holman Prize, or if she doesn't get it but still wants to work in the area, what can we give her? What can we provide her that will help her with what she wants to do, and also help us with what we want to do? And I'll take it as a given that we have a special interest and a special responsibility for mathematical content and for PDF, and also for accessible outputs from LaTeX that don't have to be PDF. So that's the sort of background for it. And the basic idea is this discussion, the goal is that we support, and we are supported by what there already is. And one of the great problems with what there already is there's so much out of it there. And I see an important thing is the growing and the growth and the health of a community of practice. There already is a community of practice, but we're not in contact with all of it. Last month we had some people from the Pretext project, and they have a very nice community of practice, and the tech community has its own community of practice, and there's not the interaction we want. I think getting more interaction between the various communities of practice is quite important. The final thing in this sort of general introduction is that it's a social problem and a technical problem. Accessibility is a social problem and a technical problem. Sometimes the technical problem is the key, and sometimes the social problem, and sometimes there may be other matters as well. So I find myself, one of my ways of working is to try and find the right question and search for the answer on the internet. And one of the things that happens from that is serendipity. You discover things you don't know before, you didn't know about. So I discovered a website called accessibleweb.com. It's in the email I sent out. And it seems to be a consulting business based upon somebody who's wanting to help people with accessibility problems. It seems to be a sort of wholesome business. And that was simply because I searched for something like accessibility tree or accessible tree navigation, and they had a good page for it. So sometimes you can search for something you know just to find other people who are also interested in it. I'm going to go into a digression here. One of my favorite websites is the Online Encyclopedia of Integer Sequences, which was founded by Neil Sloan of Bell Labs, I think, with great foresight in 1977. Now, how did he manage to set up an online encyclopedia before the web? Well, the answer is Springer published a book for him, which was called An Encyclopedia of Integer Sequences, and then it just went online, so it was the online. So the great thing about that is you can do your research and you get a sequence of integer sequences, and then you can go to that place and you find that other people are interested in that same sequence, and you'll learn mathematical connections that you probably weren't aware of. So if we can get that sort of clearinghouse, that would be helpful, because I don't think we've got that now. We sort of have bits of it. So what I'm wanting to do is I want this to be more like a workshop where we look at top level questions and figure out how we're trying to find information about them. We might take a time out to do some web searching if we want to. And the other thing is we can think about useful pages and think, well, how can we find them? How can we help other people find them? So there's a whole bunch of different ways of approaching this thing, and I'm welcome to all of them. So I'm going to stop for a little bit because I've run out of energy.
I snuck a link into the chat because I was having a conversation with some of the people that built the accessibility plugin with MathJax about making it self-voicing. That way you didn't have to have a screen reader software to actually take advantage of the audio aspect of MathJax's presentation. And the author of the plugin kind of took that idea and extended it to just a generalized tree walker. And then he was able to create, chemical molecule, a kind of a tree diagram, even like, I'm not totally sure what a TIKZ diagram is, but it seems a lot of times in my alternate media past, I had to describe a lot of computer science diagrams, especially like in courses where students were studying compiler design, so they had binary trees, or they may have been studying optimization, and it was often that we would come up with these long convoluted flowchart like outline prose explanations of what these diagrams look like. Because they were just too deep or too complex to render into a tactile diagram with any efficiency. I mean, it would be like as big as a wall. But I think, this generalized approach to thinking of an equation as a tree, as a diagram as a tree, as a chemical molecules a tree, and of course you have in object-oriented models, you often have a tree-like diagram or UML diagrams, and just the ability to come up with a standardized interface for navigating and perceiving those orally with that exploration, I think would be kind of useful. So I was excited about where he was going with that as something that could eventually maybe be plugged into some tool. It's like a superset of what MathJax is now.
I suggest we come back. We can continue with that now, but we can also come back to it later in the context of other things. But something you said you used the phrase self-voicing. And that was a phrase, a concept that I was actually searching for. I was searching for that phrase, self-voicing. And I'll take it on trust from you that it's a standard part of the vocabulary. So there's actually another thing, which is standard vocabulary and glossary. So we could probably use a sort of math accessibility glossary or a coding accessibility glossary. When I worked at the Open University in technical support, not teaching, many of the courses had glossaries, and they were really important things because students will go there when they're stuck. And there's also reading the glossary as a way of getting an overview of the whole thing.